You want to find out which is the best food for your leopard gecko. The first thing is what you should be adding to your leopard gecko's food so that your leopard gecko stays healthy and lives a long, happy life. I'm talking about multivitamins and calcium with D3. Make sure it's got little to no phosphorus inside of it. The insects you're providing for your gecko are full of phosphorus. Please make sure it's at least a minimum of a 2-to-1 ratio calcium to phosphorus. The two main products you should be supplementing your leopard gecko food with is multivitamins and calcium with D3. Some people mix them to the right ratio and feed the geckos all the time. Others will feed the multivitamins once a week and the calcium and calcium D3 2 to 3 times a week. But the main important thing that I cannot express to you enough is please make sure that you read the back of whatever brand of supplements you're using to get the instructions to how much you're supposed to use for the weight of your gecko and what it contains. Some people use calcium on its own as well, but I don't really bother because everything you need is in the calcium and D3 and the multivitamin. Even if you've got a UVB light in your leopard gecko setup, there is no way to measure how much UVB your leopard gecko is absorbing, so I really do recommend always using the calcium with D3. It's because it's the D3 that is going to help with the calcium absorption so your leopard gecko can have a healthy bone structure and live a long, healthy life. It's important that you provide these vitamins and supplements, or else your leopard gecko could end up with MBD, which is metabolic bone disease, and it's just a road you don't want to go down, and it's easily prevented with offering these supplements throughout the week. The next thing we're going to be talking about is gut loading your insects. Now, some people will not even offer their geckos this if they gut load their insects. I really don't recommend that. I recommend giving them both. By gut loading, what I mean is basically you're going to be feeding your insects prior to giving them to your leopard geckos. Rather than going to the store and just buying a pack of insects like this and giving them straight to your gecko, you're going to put them in an enclosure like this and offer them food. That way they're going to get filled with nutrients, and you're going to top the crickets' food up with the calcium powder and D3 as well. The crickets will absorb that and take that in, and then the gecko will absorb that. You can feed your crickets or insects commercial product called bug grub, which is great for them, or you can do what I do and just feed them scraps or get bits of salad or anything else you have left over. I have tortoises, so every day I'm left with scraps which either get split between the crickets and the giant African land snail, so there's never any waste. I recommend doing that route because there is nothing better than fresh food. If you do use fresh food and veg, make sure to take it out within at least 48 hours or else it will rot and it can cause a lot of death in the cricket enclosure. When it comes to hydrating your insects, you can buy water crystals from the garden centre or your local pet store, but honestly I don't really like using that just because at the end of the day it's still plastic. It's not a natural form of hydration. The way you avoid it is by using fruits and vegetables that are high in water content, such as cucumbers, peppers, and all stuff like that, that's going to give your crickets the best nutrients and hydrate them at the same time. There are many different insects you could feed them, but the main thing is that you feed a variety. If you only feed one sort of food to your leopard gecko, you are likely to run into health problems down the road because one insect can't provide all the vitamins and nutrients that the gecko needs. It's like a human only eating carrots. Yes, the carrots are really good for you, but at the same time, you're going to feel fatigued, you're going to feel horrible, and at the end of the day, you're going to need some other nutrients. There are so many different bugs to choose from. I haven't got all of them here today, but what I do have, I'm going to show you. So firstly, I have these. These are actually called calci worms or soldier fly larvae. I'm not going to open this up right now because it is filled with soldier flies, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not going to recommend this food. I've had these literally a week and they've all turned into soldier flies, so they're pretty much useless now. Not just that, they don't move around, and leopard geckos, to get them in that hunting frame of mind, they need a lot of movement. If your leopard gecko feeds on these, great, then fantastic, that's great, keep on using them and you do fine. There's nothing wrong with them, but I just don't like feeding them to my geckos because my geckos don't really like them. They're just not worth it in my opinion because they don't move a lot and the geckos don't enjoy them. My geckos. Your geckos might, Remember that every gecko is different, and if you can add a different food for variety into their diet, then great. One of the leopard gecko's most favorite foods is crickets. Crickets can come in different varieties. I like the black crickets because they don't jump as high and they don't make as much noise, which is advantage when you live with a cat because the cat loves to eat bugs. I have crickets that make a lot of noise. I'll end up with crickets all over the house because the cat will hunt them down and open a box, and yeah, it's never happened, but it has come to happening close. Crickets are full of nutrients. In fact, they're one of the best insects you could feed your gecko because they are high in protein, low in fat, and have a great moisture content. You can pick them up from any pet store that you go to because they're regularly available, and if you ever run out in that pet store, you know you can just go around to the next one and get them again. They're not a rare food. If you look after them, gut load them, they do last a while. It is probably better for you to get a couple months in advance with the crickets and get them small and start a colony off. You cannot feed your leopard gecko anything that's bigger than the width between its eyes, or else it's a choking hazard. So get them off small and raise them yourselves. Not only will you save money that way, but also you'll know that for the cricket's whole life, it's had food packed full with nutrients, and you're giving the gecko the best you can. They are higher in phosphorus. That's why it's important to make sure that this calcium powder with D3 has got little to no phosphorus in it. They are great for teaching baby geckos to hunt. They're quick, they're active, they run around, they don't jump as much, but so they're pretty terrestrial and they stay on the floor. The geckos can catch them easily, they get confident, they home in on their hunting skills. So there's the enrichment of chasing the actual prey itself. Now the next bug I'm going to talk to you about is mealworms. Now mealworms are probably the most common leopard gecko food, and the reason for that is they're cheap, you get them in bulk, and leopard geckos love them. But at the same time, keep the diet varied. Don't just feed the mealworms. If you have a leopard gecko that only eats mealworms, you know that it came from a bad place that doesn't actually care about the animal. They just care about getting the cheapest food. All of my geckos here eat crickets, dubias, mealworms, waxworms, all of that, and we're going to touch on them later, but right now we're going to talk about these. They've got a high moisture content, low fat content, and high in protein. They also wriggle around a lot, which is great for your gecko when it comes to hunting and enrichment. The next insect you're going to offer is locusts, but I don't have any locusts, and there's a reason for that. Locusts can jump really high. Leopard geckos are terrestrial. The locusts can actually climb up the enclosure, up the walls, on the walls, and they can get away from the gecko, which then the gecko cannot even get them. So you can literally have a locust living in your gecko's enclosure for weeks if you don't get it out, obviously. The other bad thing about them is they grow really quick, and you can only feed them leopard geckos when they're really small or maybe even medium. After that, you can't feed them to leopard geckos because they are quite big for the leopard gecko to swallow. You will get someone say, yeah, I feed my leopard geckos locusts all the time, giant one. Well, great, your leopard gecko is really struggling to get that down, so round of applause to you. They're high in protein. In fact, they're the second best insect you can feed your leopard gecko. So if you're okay with buying them small, and if you haven't got loads of geckos, you've only just got the one, I would recommend feeding them because they are a good insect to feed. They've got high protein, they've got high moisture content, and they're very, very low in fat. The reason why I don't like them is the geckos really do have a hard time hunting them because locusts, to me, they have another brain cell compared to crickets, and they're actually pretty more intelligent. The gecko comes up to it, it jumps up in the air, it's holding onto the walls, the gecko can't get it, and to be honest with you, like, I've had that problem happen quite a lot. Unless you're hand feeding with tweezers or something like that, then go ahead and do that, that's perfectly fine. I like to give my geckos the natural instinct to hunt, so I don't really often hand feed unless I just fancy like doing it. The next insect slash grub you can actually offer your leopard geckos are waxworms. Now waxworms are a fantastic treat for leopard geckos. They are the larvae of the wax moth. Although they are very high in fat content, leopard geckos love them. They love them to the point that they actually get addicted to them, so that can be a problem in the future. So if you are going to feed them as a treat. What I like to use them for is if I've got a baby leopard gecko, I want to train it to hand feed. It can't resist a waxworm. It feels safe and confident coming up to me. It's so focused on the waxworm, it doesn't really mind eating it out of my hand. Also, if I've got females with eggs, while they have eggs, I'll give them a waxworm or two a week. I know that sounds a lot, but they are put under a lot of pressure when they're developing eggs. So that little bit of extra fat from the waxworm gives them the extra fuel to make it through. I've had leopard geckos lay eggs that don't even look like they've laid eggs because of that. Maybe you have a female at home that's laid some eggs. or you've got a female that you've just picked up and is a bit underweight, as long as they've got no parasites and you've got them all checked out, waxworms are a great way to get them back up to normal weight. But as I said, you've got to be careful doing that, because sometimes the leopard geckos become addicted to it. So if you are trying to do that, I would probably offer, say, 5 crickets to 1 waxworm every time you feed them. The best way to think of it is fast food. You don't want to live off fast food, it's no good for you, but at the same time it's tasty, so you can have it now and again. They've got a low protein content, they've got a high moisture content. Maybe your gecko's gone on a hunger strike, you could give them a waxworm to get them back on it, and then you can just switch back over to crickets and mealworms or whatever after. But as I said, geckos can become really addicted to them to the point they will refuse to eat anything else. And if you are having that problem, then please let me know in the comment section down below, and I will make a video for you as soon as I can that tells you ways you can get around the addiction of your leopard gecko. Now the next insect I'm going to talk about is a silkworm. Now a silkworm is the larvae of the silk moth. They're a white colour, they're very cute, and unfortunately in the UK they're not as common as, say, crickets, mealworms, waxworms, dubias. The only downside to these things are you can't gut load them like you would your mealworms, crickets and dubias, because they only eat one thing, and that's a mulberry tree leaf. You can also create like a mush of mulberry tree leaves. You can buy the mush off the internet, and you can buy the silkworms off of the internet as well. There's one place that really sells them I know of, and that's on eBay, but they overcharge. So if you can go and find a local pet store and they do sell them, definitely get them from there, but you'll have to get them quick because they sell out really quick. The reason why geckos love them is they're like the texture of a waxworm, but they've got the protein and the water content of like a dubia roach. They're really high in protein. In fact, I think they're one of the best insects you can feed your leopard gecko, and leopard geckos smash them up every single time, and so do Labradors. My Labrador Dorita, if you don't know who she is, go and check out my shorts on my channel. She's a little fox red Labrador. You're bound to see her, she's everywhere. She actually ate all my silkworm colony, and yeah, that went out the window, but she enjoyed them. She was happy and safe, she didn't have any problems with it. She just started pooing silk for the next week, and I said no, she didn't, but that's okay, because Dorita likes snack. They still move quite fast, but at the same time they don't move as fast as other insects. So maybe if you've got a leopard gecko that has something like Enigma syndrome or something like that, where it struggles eating, this is a great food source for them, because the gecko doesn't have to have great accuracy to eat these things, because they literally just stand still and like. And if you don't like flying things, basically if you don't like this, silkworms are the best, because they turn into moths, but the moths can't eat and the moths can't fly, and they are so adorable. Honestly, if you don't know what I'm on about, go and look for it right now. Well, after this video actually. In fact, I think that was the moth that was the meme that happened years ago.
Lamb.
Yeah, lamb. The next insect I'm going to talk about is dubia roaches. This is a dubia roach right now. Now, dubia roaches are probably one of the best foods you can feed your leopard gecko. This is an adult female. I'll show you a male in a minute. When they get to this size, the adult leopard geckos struggle to eat them basically, and you can't really feed them. So you've got to use them as a colony. I can guarantee Tigger in a minute is going to spot this bug and think it's his. They're full of protein. They're full of water content. They're easy to look after. They don't make noise, they don't smell. You can breed them yourselves. They breed like crazy once you get a colony going, so you can save money there. If you want to know how to set up a dubia roach colony, again, let me know in the comment section down below and I can help you do that. These are a great source of protein for your leopard geckos, because they're not actually as high as phosphorus as crickets are. Just make sure you're getting the right size of dubia roach for your leopard gecko, because if not, there will be choking hazards involved. The reason why I think these are one of the best insects, they're pretty gross, I know, and not just that, they last a long time. They live up to 2 years, I think. Crickets, they don't last long. Mealworms, they don't last long. These things last for ages, and sometimes I really feel guilty about just feeding them. Like, that's why when they get to the adult stage, I'm actually happy, because it's like, you've made it past the trials and now you're here in my home and I don't have to kill you. They breed like crazy. This is a male dubia roach. As you can see, they have wings, but they're pretty much cannot fly. They're useless. They're just for look. They're just cool up.
They can jump.
They
though.
can jump like that, definitely, but they can't fly. That was more of a hot part. They glide. They're like chickens. Chickens can't fly, but they have wings. So if a chicken's on the top of a building, it won't die when it falls off because it can glide. Same things with them. They're full of protein, probably one of the best foods for your leopard geckos. But remember, make sure you get the right size. Also, if you're from the UK and they get out, don't worry, they'll die because they need a warm temperature. So it's certain death if they get out, which sounds absolutely brutal, but they're not invasive. Then you can get giant mealworms. I don't recommend them because they are just basically mealworms on steroids. They are literally given steroids to get to a certain size. They can't breed anymore, and they basically just get huge and die. It's just as simple as that. Again, I don't use them, so that's what you've got to think about as well. Have you got plenty of access to them? If one pet shop runs out, I know I can go to another one. As for how often you should be feeding your leopard gecko, baby leopard geckos should be fed every single day. The way I do it and the way you can do it at home, and I think this is the best way personally, and that's learn your gecko, learn how much, get a notebook, write down each time. So you put 10 crickets in the enclosure, it only eats 8, okay, so next time I'll put 9 in. If it eats 8 again, you know it's only going to eat the 8, so you can put 8 in, and then just keep that extra 1 or 2 in so it can have the availability to keep growing. You never want to put too many insects inside your gecko's enclosure, because what that can do is it can stress the gecko out. The crickets will be crawling all over the gecko, so that's why I think it's really important for you to have a notebook and just jot down how many crickets you put in and how many you take out every time. Never leave crickets in there longer than they should be, but they feed on the gecko's poo again, and then your gecko's going to eat that, so you don't want to recycle that whole thing there. Put them in there. The next day, if there's still a couple, then I'll top them up again. As for adults, it's important to make sure that you're feeding them again a variety, and you're giving them at least 2 to 3 times a week. That all depends on the size and how active your adult is. I can't tell you to give your adult gecko 10 crickets each feeding. You could have a giant leopard gecko, which is a gene of leopard gecko, and they could need 15 to 20. That's basically on you to work out how much your leopard geckos need. If you have an overweight gecko, maybe you've brought it in off someone, or maybe you've just like lost track a bit and gecko ends up a bit chubby, that's totally fine. The worst thing you can do is reduce how many times you feed it a week. The best thing you can do is just reduce how many prey items you give it. That way its metabolism isn't slowing down, it's all staying healthy, your gecko's still eating, and it's doing it in a healthy way, rather than just you not feeding it and it dropping all of its weight. Your gecko will grow, and as it grows, it will gain more weight, and once it gets to a certain weight, it will kind of like plateau and stay at one sort of weight. What will happen is then it will start getting too fat. You want to make sure you're monitoring the gecko's weight and writing it down and finding the best weight for your leopard gecko. Every single leopard gecko is different. If you've got a giant gecko, it's got a skinny tail and everything else, but it's still weighing 80 grams, you still need to fatten it up and give it enough food so it's like at 100. If you want to know what a healthy gecko looks like, just make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell notification, because we are going to be uploading a video shortly that is going to teach you how to identify a healthy leopard gecko, a skinny leopard gecko, and an obese leopard gecko. I hope you guys have learned enough. I hope you guys have took something away from this. If you have any questions whatsoever, I'm always happy to help you. I'm always here for you. Just message me down in the comment section below, and I'm sure I can help you in some way. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I've obviously not mentioned all the bugs. I've just mentioned the ones that leopard geckos prefer and the most common ones you can pick up from the pet stores. If you've got some other information about other insects down below that you feed your leopard gecko, then please don't hesitate, put it down below. This channel's all about help, so help someone out. Teach them something else. That's what it's all about. Teach me something. I'm always learning. You can never know enough. Everyone's constantly learning. That's the beauty of it. I will see you next time.